Hello friends in Christ, welcome to another video. Prepare yourselves for a story that will touch your soul deeply. An unbelievable journey of a heart so hardened that it went to one of the most sacred places of faith. Not to seek solace, but to confront, to challenge, and yes, to blaspheme what so many consider divine. What this person didn't know is that fate, or perhaps a greater force, had completely different plans for that encounter. Follow every detail because the outcome of this story is something no one expected. Before we dive in, I want to ask you to write in the comments the names of people and relatives who need prayer, and we will add all of these names to our main prayer with the rosary. There was a soul who walked through life carrying a heavy burden of disbelief and bitterness. For this person, faith was nothing more than an illusion, a refuge for the weak or a tool of control for the cunning. Years of disappointment and a cynical worldview had cemented this conviction, turning any mention of the sacred into a source of derision. The concept of a loving God or a caring Heavenly Mother was, to her, a cruel joke, an empty narrative that only prolonged the suffering of those who trusted in them blindly. It was then that she heard about Medjugorje, a place where multitudes made pilgrimages in search of miracles and peace, moved by supposed Marian apparitions. Instead of sincere curiosity, a dark and provocative idea emerged. To go there, not to believe but to prove to herself and perhaps to the world that it was all a farce, a theater of cheap thrills. The objective was clear: to blaspheme, to mock, and to leave with the unshakable certainty of her own rightness. Arriving in Medjugorje was a shock to her logical and disbelieving mind. From the moment she stepped onto that ground, she realized the environment was unlike anything she had known. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of people of all ages and nationalities walked with purposes she considered naive, but which exuded a peace and devotion she could not completely ignore. Rosaries in hand, soft chants echoing, murmurs of prayer in different languages. All of this created an atmosphere of profound reverence that contrasted sharply with the storm of skepticism and contempt boiling within her. Rather than intimidating, this mass display of faith only reinforced her determination to confront what she saw as a vast collective delusion. She watched every face, searching for signs of fanaticism or weakness, mentally preparing the words and gestures she would use for her act of provocation. The moment she chose for her action was during one of the most intense celebrations, amid a kneeling crowd, their eyes filled with emotion and hope, all united in a silent and fervent cry to Our Lady. As the songs of praise rose to the heavens and devotion hung in the air, she stood there, not with a shout, but with a stillness charged with defiance. Her thoughts were sharp razors, cutting through every word of prayer, every act of faith. Inwardly, she uttered calculated blasphemies, not loudly so as not to be noticed, but with an intensity that made her feel victorious in her rebellion. She felt a strange pleasure, a kind of dark triumph, in seeing herself so different from the mass of believers, so above their superstitions. While around her, people fervently sought Mary's face, she refused to look, focusing on her own conviction of intellectual superiority, on her intimate act of denial and mockery. Once the moment of her inner blasphemy was over, she expected to feel a confirmation of her truth, a relief at having freed herself from that deception. However, what came was not triumph, but a strange and unexpected feeling of emptiness, a hollow echo that resonated in her chest. That initial pleasure quickly dissipated, giving way to a subtle unease, an uneasiness she couldn't decipher. She expected to feel even more distant, more unyielding in her disbelief, but to her surprise, a small crack had begun to appear in her armor of skepticism. It wasn't a blinding light or an audible voice, but an internal whisper, almost imperceptible, that questioned the solidity of her own certainties. For the first time in a long time, The arrogance that had accompanied her gave way to an uncomfortable question mark, a disconnect between what she expected to feel and what she actually felt. In the days that followed, that initial unease transformed into an increasingly intense internal battle. She tried to rationalize, to attribute the feeling of emptiness to the fatigue of the journey or the strangeness of the environment, but it was futile. The images of the pilgrims' serene faces, the melodies of the prayers, the stillness of the mountains, everything seemed to penetrate the defenses she had built over the years. She found herself observing people with a new curiosity, no longer to mock, but to try to understand the source of so much peace and devotion. Each sermon she heard, each testimony she listened to, even in passing, seemed to pierce her wall of disbelief a little deeper. The anger and contempt that had driven her there began to feel like an unnecessary burden, and what had once been strength now felt like a prison. The armor of cynicism finally began to shatter in a moment of profound stillness. The person was alone, watching the sunset over Medjugorje, when an overwhelming sense of helplessness and loneliness overcame her. In that instant, all her self-sufficiency and her belief in her own intelligence crumbled. She saw for the first time clearly how exhausted she was by her own anger, by her contempt for all that was sacred. Uncontrollable tears began to stream down her face, not of sadness, but of a liberation she had never imagined possible. In that cry there was no longer room for mockery, only for overwhelming humility. Amidst her sobs, a word she had mocked so many times, a name she had blasphemed, burst from her lips for the first time with sincerity, a timid whisper, yet filled with a deep longing for something she didn't even know what it was. Mother! It was there, in that sincere cry, that the conversion took place. There were no fireworks or grand revelations, but a profound and complete turning of heart. The darkness that had accompanied her was replaced by a soft, warm light, a peace that flooded every fiber of her being. The emptiness that had tormented her gave way to an indescribable fullness. The same symbols and prayers that had previously been the target of her derision now resonated with a truth and beauty she had never perceived. The hardened heart which had come to Medjugorje to challenge faith found in it the only path to true freedom. The person who had previously blasphemed knelt in prayer, not out of obligation, but out of a newfound love, surrendering herself completely to that presence she had previously so vehemently denied. The transformation was total, and she rose from that ground no longer as the same embittered soul, but as a new being reborn in faith and hope. Now stop for a moment and look within yourself. The story we tell isn't just about a person in a distant place. It's a mirror to our own souls. How often, perhaps not with the same intensity or purpose, have we also built walls around our hearts? Perhaps we haven't gone to a sacred place to blaspheme, but how often in the silence of our thoughts have we defied God? How often, faced with difficulty, pain, or disappointment, has our first reaction been to blame, to doubt, to feel a bitterness that whispered to us that faith is useless? This person in the story was driven by pain or arrogance that drove them to an extreme, but the seed of this attitude exists in all of us. It's the seed of self-sufficiency, the dangerous idea that our intellect and reason are the final judges of truth, and that anything we can't touch or explain is, consequently, a lie. Think about your own life. What is your Medjugorje? What is that area of your faith that you avoid, that you question in secret, or that you simply abandon because you felt it no longer made sense? It's an invitation to honesty, to acknowledge that, to a greater or lesser extent, we've all been in that place of challenge, even if it only occurred within ourselves. And what happens after the challenge? History shows us something crucial. Heaven's first response wasn't a punishment or a display of power to crush the skeptic. It was silence. It was emptiness. And it's precisely at this point that our journey connects deeply with that person's. Think about those moments when you felt most distant from faith. Was the answer you found a triumphant joy in your disbelief? Or was it, in fact, a hollow echo, a sense that something fundamental was missing? Often, when we turn away from God, we find not the freedom we expected, but a deeper loneliness. It's the loneliness of someone who believes they're in control of everything, but who deep down knows they're in control of nothing. That unease, that crack in the armor that the person in the story felt, is God's mercy in action. It's not a voice shouting but a whisper asking, "Is this really what you want? Does this certainty bring you peace?" God allows us to feel the weight of our own choices, not as punishment, but as an invitation to return. He lets us experience the emptiness of the world without Him, so that we can, by contrast, yearn for the fullness that only His presence can offer. Transformation only happens through an act our modern world despises: surrender. The person in our story only found peace when she broke down, when her tears washed away all her arrogance and cynicism. She stopped fighting. And here's the most important question for you today. What do you need to surrender? What is the weight you insist on carrying alone, believing that surrender is a sign of weakness? It could be the weight of an old resentment, the pain of a loss you never surrendered to God, the mask of strength you wear to hide your insecurities, or the intellectual pride that prevents you from simply kneeling and saying, "I don't know everything, I need help." Conversion is not a logical exercise. It is an act of surrender of the heart. It is recognizing that fighting against God is, in fact, fighting against our own happiness. The moment that soul allowed itself to cry and whisper, "Mother," was the moment it stopped trying to be strong and allowed itself to be loved. And this is the same choice presented to us every day. Continue the exhausting battle of self-sufficiency or accept the loving embrace of a God who patiently waits for our surrender, not to defeat us but to lift us up. This story, with its surprising twist, invites us to reflect on the unshakable power of faith and the capacity for transformation that resides within each of us. How often in our daily lives do we find ourselves in situations of disbelief, fatigue, and disillusionment, just like the person in our story? Modern life, with its pressures and challenges, often distances us from daily prayer, from the preaching that nourishes the soul, from the practice of forgiveness that frees the heart. It is essential that we seek inner peace, that we have more faith in moments of doubt, and that we open ourselves to the conversions that Jesus and Mary constantly offer us, whether a major life change or a small daily adjustment in our way of thinking and acting. Just as in the story, the path to peace begins with a simple act of surrender and trust. Therefore, I want to ask you again. Leave in the comments the names of people and relatives who need prayer, and we will lovingly include them in our main prayer with the Rosary. May this story inspire each of you to view faith not as a weakness, but as our greatest strength. What did you think of this story of transformation? Leave your opinion and thoughts in the comments below. Your participation is very important to us. If you were touched by this message, don't forget to like it. It really helps our channel reach more people. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos filled with faith and hope. May Jesus and Mary bless you all. Amen.